You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Shoe In Show. It's Andy Polk on this week with Sandy Mines of FDRA. We appreciate you joining us. Sandy, the whole ballgame for footwear is making the right type of shoe for the right consumer in the right way. And we focus a lot on that around the data, around analysis. And we work with really great partners who support us in our mission and support the industry. Recently, this group helped sponsor our cocktail party to bring people together in New York during Fanny Market Week in August. So it's one of those things where it's a pleasure to have someone on who is as knowledgeable as he is, but also someone who's been a great partner to us and to the industry at large. And I think it's the perfect time to have this individual come on, because everyone in footwear, everyone in retail is trying to figure out in this environment, the consumer is changing their behavior. How do we figure that out, right? So with that, Sandy, I'll let you tee up our guest today, and then we'll hop into it.
Great. Thanks, Andy. We're really excited to have a reoccurring guest on today's Shoe In Show podcast. First Insight's CEO, Greg Petro, to share some great data, insights, and predictive behaviors for 2023. So welcome, Greg.
Thanks, Andy. Good to be back. Good to see you again.
Great. What can you tell us about the latest trends that you're seeing this fall, whether it's back to school shopping, the superstore trends? What's going on today? Tell us a little bit of your top line data and information that you want to share.
Yeah, there's a lot. That's a pretty loaded question. There's quite a bit going on. I would say top of mind. Let's talk about it from a consumer perspective. I was just at a conference in New York 2 days ago with a Gen Z group of individuals. And funny enough, the data we had just launched indicates that 92% of Gen Zs are worried about inflation. They've caught up to every other generation. They weren't far behind, but now that number is pretty significant. The only time we've ever seen a larger percentage of concern was back in February of 2020, when there were 8 cases of COVID in the US and people were worried about an outbreak at 97%. So there's a lot of concern right now in the marketplace from a consumer's perspective, generationally, around inflation. Obviously, some statistics have continued to come out to support that is a issue that we need to address. How that's affecting consumers, interestingly enough, is they haven't really stopped buying. We've been working with brands, in fact, shoe brands, manufacturers, on raising prices, and in some cases twice within the same season, to address some of the effects. The challenge is that if it's not done correctly, it's going to erode unit sales in a significant way. The good news, the other piece of news is, and I've written about it recently on Forbes, is that traffic is up. I think there's a general interest to shop. I think that interest rates going up are going to affect certain purchasing behaviors, and maybe even a shift into apparel and away from other product categories based upon what is going to be less disposable income.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, because as we think about how the economy operates in a recessionary environment, whether we are in a recession or not, the debate, whatever it is, people have more constraints. Let's put it that way, more constraints on their money. And in this environment, when you have big ticket items that could take more out, you start to pull back. So we see that with like washing machines, general appliances, kind of upgrades for your house, stuff like that. They're pulling back a tad bit, but still want that kind of good feeling when you buy something nice for yourself, right? So shoes fit in there, apparel fits in there, handbags fit in there, where it's a spend, but it's not a huge spend, right? You're not
Right.
outlying that money month after month. And so in your Forbes article, I was really interested to see that, you were forecasting, and I don't want to put words in your mouth because I want to hear from you, but like over the holiday season, the big box chains will do really well. And I'm wondering, is that because of value shopping where they can find a basket of goods at a better rate than just individually shopping in different places? Like, how do you see it working out over the holidays?
Yeah, well, and to add on to your point about the recession, it's interesting. 28% of consumers in the United States, and this is speaking across the general demographic, believe we're in a recession. So that their consumers believe it, but yet they continue to spend. I think as you look towards the latter half of fall and into the holidays, we've seen the acceleration of purchasing continue. Part of that is driven in the growth related to the raising of prices. And that will feed into, no pun intended, because of the grocery effect, into the big box chains, Walmart, Costco, et cetera. I think as you think about it, you're right. Discretionary spend is shifting. We're already seeing this in the car markets. Used cars are going down. There's still pent-up demand because of supply chain issues for new cars, but the supply chain market, the supply chain and the used car market is decreasing at its increased rate, right? So, not to sound like an oxymoron, but it is slowing down precipitously. Now, the issue that I think we as an industry think about accessories, footwear, apparel. I think it's a natural inclination. People are going to continue to buy, and they're going to shift their spendings. We've seen this across, even in 2000 past events that have occurred. And I think that bodes potentially well for the positioning of certain brands and retailers that are set up to hit certain value thresholds for people. And I don't mean pricing, meaning they have to lower the price. I think there has to be a perceived value perception in the marketplace. And when that happens, there's going to be a very high conversion rate.
That's interesting. Certain categories are really moving in a different direction, like travel, spike in travel. The prices to fly and to stay at hotels and variety places around the US and internationally are just skyrocketing, right? So out of COVID, people may have pulled back a little bit on shopping for their home and shopping, eating in and things like that. And they're out and about, they're traveling, they're spending money on eating out and restaurants. And like you said, the food market is going to be interesting to see what's happening. And the prices around gas now changing a little bit, making it a little bit more accessible. So I'm interested to see what happens this holiday season, but really a little bit further out, 2023. Do you have any predictions or thoughts about after we get out of this 3-month period, what will we see next year?
Yeah. Well, thank you for the question, Sandy. I think that there are a number of fundamentals within the economy and the industry that support a fairly decent fall and holiday period, right? So there's a lot of data that suggests, including our own, that the holidays may not be a bad period of time. It actually 2022 might end itself in a pretty decent way. That being said, there are a series of fundamental unknowns that I think that are starting to play themselves out in a way, leading indicators. There's indications that the price of gasoline will again spike based upon supply constraints. And that has an effect. And when we speak very broadly, we have to break it down into socioeconomic groups because the purchase patterns and the behavior at each of those groups are affected differently by a spike in gas prices, right? Just based upon discretionary spend. So in general terms, what that indicates is that luxury potentially is going to have, a fairly good period of time, regardless. The general consensus, I think, is that the fall Christmas period is going to hold its own. And then the challenge with the increase in interest rates, and you have to think that trickles down into credit card debt. I was just contemplating a piece that I'm writing right now to put out in Forbes. And the idea is that if interest rates actually continue to hike themselves up and people buy, and if you look at the average amount of savings, which is decreasing, not increasing as it was pre-pandemic, what that's going to lead to is people saddled with, 25% interest rates on credit card debt. And if you've ever dealt with that, it's onerous. It becomes very onerous very quickly. So I think that how people will behave is going to be predicated upon the tightening of the marketplace. Plus, we're starting to see inklings of layoffs. So what that all leads to is a 2023 picture for the second half, I think, of 2023 that may be more constrained than most people think.
I think that's really fair to say. I think that we've seen people going back to work. Fashion Week was really vibrant. People are in the stores again. New York City is picking up. Like I said, travel and airports. I mean, that part of the market, it seems very buzzy. The housing market not having such a great moment right now. And like you said, we don't know what's going to happen with gas prices, and that will affect.
Something to keep in mind, right? While travel is at times high, most of those tickets were bought a while ago. And it has to be considered the fact that, most people buy their tickets well in advance. And what we're seeing is leading indicators from consumers, especially the younger generations, are constraining their spend on travel, entertainment, and dining out. And, dining out's an immediate effect, right? So because the cost of food is multiplicative when that's how the restaurants make money, right? So consequently, a 10% increase gets multiplied. And that gets carried on to consumers. Well, the discretionary spend's decreasing because they're having to pay for things. So consequently, we're already seeing this cuts in dining, cuts in travel. So, I think part of that still leads itself well to segments of the industry, including footwear, right? But as we're also seeing in some of our data, categories of footwear are going to behave differently. So it's going to be a fascinating period of time. But I would say that one thing that's critical, I've been speaking to a number of CEOs as I've been traveling around, is that, most of them have gotten to a point of, I'm not going to say they're just exhausted from the amount of events that are happening on a frequency of which they occur. Mm-hmm. And so what they need, and they're talking about with me, is the idea of just building a plan, understanding where the data comes in, but not overreacting. Right? Because if they change their strategy too much and they don't have enough forward-looking views, what's going to happen is they're going to pivot the business on an ongoing basis, and you create such a bullwhip effect in your supply chain and in your business. It can be unrecoverable in some ways.
Yeah. That reminds me of the foxtrot for cotillion, where you just keep going around and around and around, keep pivoting enough, you
come back to where you were.
Exactly. It's like a dance that keeps happening. In July, I was asked at our sourcing summit event when we were looking at geopolitical issues and fears. And this was still at a time when the Ukraine war was still very fervent, right? It's still ongoing and it's still a concern, but there was still a fervency to people paying a lot of attention to it. And instead of talking about the war's impact, my biggest concern was debt, global debt, and it remains and only is increasing in terms of sovereign debt issues that we're seeing with bailouts and with emerging countries having problems with inflation and the loans they have. But I think to your point around 25% credit, 25% APR on your credit card is something we haven't seen in decades. And
Right.
I was making a joke the other day with someone. It's like, if you're a young person in banking and someone comes up and says they want to buy a CD, well, number one, you don't know what a CD is for music, but you certainly don't know what a CD is at the bank, right? Like all
Right.
these different rate increases and all these old instruments that we used to have for
Right.
savings and spending and all that. It's coming back to where it was in the 80s and 90s, and it's very interesting in that sense that we're dealing with the financials from the 90s as well as the fashion from the 90s. In some ways, maybe it's a bit too much, but I want to go back to one of your points you said earlier, where you are helping companies figure out pricing strategy in this environment.
Yeah.
And we know that people's inventories in their warehouses are still stacked, even as they're bringing in new product, preparing for holiday. So how are you and First Insight helping companies think through how to move that inventory correctly without, as you said earlier, if you price it too high, you're going to ruin your per unit sale, right? So you don't want to damage your overall, but you do want to move the product. So, and I had heard tales that you guys are actually going back and taking old inventory and running it through your platform to get a better idea what the pricing should be.
Yeah.
So I'm just interested, from the work that you guys are doing, how are you guys helping from like a case study perspective?
Yeah. Thank you. Great. So Andy, I mean, obviously we have a great history at our company. We're now in our 15th year of existence, and we're on what we call First Insight 3.0, which is really an expansion of our capabilities. Most people know us in the industry of product selection and helping people do digital product testing, design, and all that kind of good stuff. But actually, the second capability we launched about 10 years ago was pricing. Gartner wrote about us recently and we were quite pleased with the write-up on our unique capabilities in the marketplace. One of the core tenets, another core tenet of our company in pricing capabilities really, I think, is being highlighted because of the situation of inflation, and something we haven't seen for a generation, honestly, in the work environment, and people don't know how to respond to it. So what we found and what we are doing actually is to your point, even taking known products and products that have been in the marketplace for a long period of time with our customers, which our customers now, I would say north of 90% are using our pricing, which is quite fascinating to my perspective, and doing multiple tests within a season to understand the fluidity of the consumer and what their demand is like, because price is a lever for demand, right? You can increase and decrease velocity. And when you have supply chain issues, it's a really interesting lever to be able to manage the inventory, right, that you do have, so that you don't stock out or you have the availability of stock. And if you're always able to do this in a predictive way, meaning you're anticipating what's going to happen, if this is to happen, we can do this, it gives you a competitive advantage. And I think that's really why many of our customers, we're now in 45 country currency combinations, believe it or not, and it's happening everywhere. I'm headed over to Europe in a little bit, and to share some inflationary studies. And what's fascinating to me, much like we're seeing in the US, regionally, inflation is happening differently. and behaviors of consumers are different by region. And so even national brands in the US need to adjust their strategy to take that into account. And I think it represents an enormous opportunity. I'm not talking about pricing per item by store. Maybe you can do that, but certainly I think there's an opportunity by region based upon where demand is, where the product availability is, and how companies can be more nimble to do that. So and that goes back even into the most basic of products. Certainly I can't talk about specifics, right, and strategies of companies. But I can tell you, in the most basic lines of business right now, that is occurring. And on the most extreme ends of fashion, it's occurring. So, our customers now represent about 700. Their revenues represent about 750 billion. So it's a pretty broad swath. And to have 90% of them doing this on an adjustment basis, it's pretty fascinating to watch the scenario. But I think it will be the way people can navigate into the future.
So, Greg, tell us a little bit more specifically on the process of how you do that. Is it on a continual basis? Is it a couple times a year that you're doing those adjustments and those meetings? Tell us a little bit about the process behind that.
Yeah, I think the rapidity of giving adjustments to prices could happen daily, right? Are companies able to do that and willing to do it? I think it depends on their business model. We have digitally native brands who want to have more flexibility or dynamic pricing models, and we support that on an ongoing basis. But I think for most companies, what they're trying to do, whether they have inventory postponement strategies or inventory buildup, or they're going, however they're trying to flow goods, I think the flowing of the goods is determining the pricing strategy. And when they come into nodes of transportation, for inventory that's been delayed, that's another big factor, right? And as soon as they get a sense of that, they're pulling a trigger and running a series of, and I mean literally thousands and thousands of products are being tested that day to understand what the implications are, because there's a network effect to not only those products, but the existing products. Because as you mentioned earlier, and I wrote about, the customers coming to the store, they're there to make a decision. If the product isn't available, you now have an allocation of inventory that may or may not be available or adjusted. And so one factor you can do is, whether you have too much or too little, you can adjust pricing. And I think consumers understand that.
Yeah. And I think you're hitting the nail on the head with like how you use these softwares and these tools and these strategies. And I think the winners will be the people who understand their audience best. And in an environment where there are economic challenges, like going back to your core consumer and really leaning into core product, and continually trying to engage and understand, that will be the folks who win. And we see that in the marketplace always. It's if you walk in and talk to anybody in a C-suite in certain companies, successful companies right off the bat know who their customer is. Yeah. And they focus on it relentlessly, and they build product around that. And I think that's, we saw that during kind of COVID. I think the wholesale effect of just making a bunch of shoes and bringing it in is a big problem if that's the model that you're using, without knowing ahead of time who wants to buy this and at what price. Right. Oh my gosh, yeah. Like, come on, like we got to do better in this environment. But Greg, thank you so much for coming on today and giving us an honest look at 2023. Encouraging, comments about holiday 22. If we end this year flat, it will be a big year for footwear because of last year's huge historic jump.
Right. Yeah. Flat's the new up, right?
That's great. Yeah, exactly. That's great. So we're hoping for flat. And I would also, and I've said this in other episodes too, if you're out there and you're running your company, better, stash some cash for 2023 because we don't know where things will go geopolitically and in the marketplace. And if COVID taught us anything, is we need capital reserves that matter as we go ahead. So again, Greg, First Insight's been a great partner of ours for many years. We really appreciate the support you provide us to help the industry and the support that you provide your companies and the industry at large. We really appreciate it and look forward to continuing that work in 2023 as well.
We appreciate that and appreciate the opportunity to serve the industry. So thank you so much, Andy and Sandy, for your time.
Absolutely. And of course, if you're on our Tuesday calls, we often have someone from First Insight at least every month or every other month come on and release their reports to our members. So you can stay up to date that way. Greg also has a great, I think it's almost weekly on Forbes where he's presenting data and information and insights and ideas with great perspective that you can follow as well. So there's a lot of tools and resources to keep up to date. And if your company is not using First Insight to do analytics and to look at your customer and look at your pricing and inventory, and even looking at what you're making, should you be making that product at all? Contact us and we'll happily put you in contact with First Insight to get involved and to get that intelligence you need to make better business decisions. With that, we hope everyone has a great fall leading into the holiday season. Again, shoeandshow.com is our website with all our great content and catalog. Until next time, thank you so much for listening. Next Monday, new episode. Keep your ears open. Until next time, Shoein is out.
Shoein has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.